Okay, this is try number 4 on my intro. Maybe I'll do it better this time. Warriors started out Dragonflight very strong, then they got nerfed to death. And then they were slowly buffed up, basically for the entire rest of the expansion, and now they're actually pretty decent, even if they're not really all that flashy. As for right now, they are in pretty good shape as we head into the next expansion. Hi, it's Llarold, and I'm going to talk about how to play a Protection Warrior in patch 11.0. The War Within is right around the corner, it's time to get hyped, but first, don't forget to like and subscribe. Alright, I'm going to start with the nerfs. All the tanks were nerfed today as of the time I'm talking about this. I made a big long video about how and why, and I will summarize the warrior nerfs by saying they're not so bad by comparison, still not great though. In terms of stuff that actually affects how you play the class, warriors have received some changes to their talents and baseline changes as well, so I'm going to cover the latter part first. Berserker Rage is now a baseline skill, which is great, finally it's back. Defensive Stance no longer reduces your damage output, which means you can pretty much just always camp and de-stance unless you're not actively tanking, and you really want that 3% crit chance from Battle Stance. The difference between the two is way smaller now, and that's probably best for the class. And that's about it, surprisingly. Warrior is in pretty good shape, and their hero talent trees are very fun and cool, but yeah, there aren't a ton of changes for them as a class. I could go for more, to be honest, but I do like Warrior. It's my second favorite class, it was my original main, and it's staying mostly the same as it has been toward the end of Dragonflight is not the end of the world. It could be worse. He could get nerfed. I wrote that line before the nerfs came in. Oh yeah, I'm Cassandra. Tier set bonuses are supposedly being turned off with the pre-patch, and that actually will be pretty bad for Warriors, but you know, it is what it is. It's the pre-patch, you're weak for a couple of weeks, and then you're on to a new expansion and everything's fun and great. Now let's talk about talents, and I'm gonna pull them up right here. Normally I would start with the class talents, and I think I'm gonna start with the warrior spec talents instead, because I really just wanna go over what's changed. This is the setup that I would run for the majority of content. I will link both Raid and Mythic Plus setups, but you know, this is the Mythic Plus setup. And for Raid, I would probably drop like Disrupting Shout and take Sudden Death. But you'll note that it's very similar to the previous standard setup, and that's because not much has changed, baby. Fight Through the Flames is a new talent. It makes it so that you take a little bit less magic damage while you're in defensive stance. The amount that it provides in terms of damage reduction is so small, I don't think this talent is ever worth taking, ever. You'll note that Dance of Death and Storm of Steel, these old talents over here that used to be a little fork, just like over on the left-hand side with Shield Charge, is now a choice node. You will never take either of these two talents. They are both very bad. So now there is a choice between trash and garbage. Ignore them both. As for most of the rest of the talents, not much has changed. Defender's Aegis and Impenetrable Wall were both buffed, so you're still going to take Impenetrable Wall. Heavy Repercussions is unchanged. Into the Fray was nerfed very slightly. I think you'll still take Into the Fray for a lot of content. But, you know, that's up to you as to how squirrely you are, how worried you are about shield block uptime. Alright, now let's take a look at the class tree, which actually has gotten some pretty significant changes, and we'll start with some of the passives up top here. Some of these things like Fast Footwork and War Machine and Leeching Strikes. There's been a kind of a reconfiguration, a rejiggling of talents in the top half of the tree. I like that Bounding Stride is maybe a little bit easier to get, but I don't love that it's not helping with pathing at all. For the most part, you're still able to take a lot of the same talents as you were in the past. You will note that, I can't remember the name of it all of a sudden, but the talent that modified Thunderclap and made it apply Rend, that talent is gone now, whatever it was called. It doesn't matter, you don't have to remember it anymore, it doesn't exist. That's just baseline functionality in Thunderclap now. So you can take Crackling Thunder, get more radius on your Thunderclap, make it hit a bunch larger space. You can see, big Thunderclap, and also a larger slow on it as well. That's pretty cool. You also will notice, you're commanded to notice that in the bottom third of the tree, Shockwave is no longer there. It's been pulled up into the middle of the tree. It's a lot easier to get, and you can get Rumbling Earth a lot easier as well. So crowd control in general is just a lot more available for Prot Warriors. Stormbolt, Shockwave, Intimidating Shout. You've got Heroic Leap for a bit more mobility as well. Things are looking pretty good, CC-wise, in the middle of the tree. Everything's sick. Then we get to the bottom of the tree, and the middle of the tree, Avatar, Unstoppable Force, Wild Strikes, One-Handed Weapon Specialization. These are all still there, these are all still great, and normal. They're what you'd expect. Armored to the teeth, still good. But then things get a little weird when you look at Thunderous Roar. Thunderous Roar no longer grants any sort of rage at all, and, as you can see, Thunderous Words, the talent beneath it that used to increase all of your damage with bleeds all of the time, only applies while Thunderous Roar is active now. This means that Thunderous Roar kind of stinks now, unfortunately. I don't really think that this is the go-to setup. Now, you can run it if you want, but because you have to take 2 points in Cruel Strikes, which just gives you crit chance and execute damage, that is quite a sacrifice to make. You have to give up a point somewhere else in order to be able to pull that off. You either have to, like, not take one of the supporting talents, which I wouldn't want to do that, or you have to give up a point in Armored to the Teeth, or you have to give up One-Handed Weapon Spec, or you have to give up Unstoppable Force. All of those are non-starters for me. No thanks. Pass. So instead, it is Year of the Spear again. Champion Spear, back on the menu. Champion's Might gives you increased duration on it. You get increased crit damage while you're in the spear, or technically to enemies that are within the spear. So that's useful, and then Piercing Challenge just increases your damage and your rage generation from the spear. So, spear is back on the menu. The only problem I have with the spear is they reworked the graphic of it. I think there is a glyph for this that you can go get in Bastion if you played during Shadowlands, but as far as I'm concerned, I think that the spear looks kinda not great. It looks like dirt or poop. I don't like the visuals of the spear. Other than that, I think the spear, I'm happy to have it back. I like the way that it CCs enemies, keeps enemies locked down so they can't jump around. As for Avatar and Unstoppable Force, they are what they are. They're what you're used to. I would say, generally speaking, even though there was a big reconfiguration, you know, they're playing Boggle. They took the Boggle board and they shook it all up, and then they reconfigured all the letters all in different directions. It still feels and looks pretty much the same. I feel like I'm playing the same class because I am playing the same class. It's all the same. Everything's the same. Nothing changed. All right, now let's talk about Protection Warrior's abilities. Shield Slam is still your main rotational skill, and Thunderclap is still your secondary rage generator, kind of your main AoE skill. Revenge is still your main offensive rage spender. Execute is better for single target damage, but it only works when enemies are in execute range, and it is single target only. Thunderclap deals a ton of extra damage while Avatar is active, so much so that it is your core skill in AoE. Basically, your rotation during Avatar will look something like Thunderclap, Shield Slam, Thunderclap, Revenge, Thunderclap, something else, Thunderclap, Year of the Spear, whatever it is. As for defensive skills, you have Shield Block, which you want to maintain all the time. Outside of maybe the first second of a pull, when you're still generating rage to cast that initial Shield Block, you never ever want to let it fall off. And then Ignore Pain is your other main defensive skill. This is probably the sticking point for like very new players for Warrior of like, should I Ignore Pain and let Shield Block fall off? The answer is always no. Unless you're taking purely spell damage, I guess, the answer is always no. It is a very basic absorb shield, and balancing between spending your rage on Ignore Pain and Revenge or Execute is really the most complex aspect of a Protection Warrior's core rotation, and kind of the thing that is more of a sticking point for higher level players as they're kind of developing their skill with the class, learning to balance out exactly how much to Ignore Pain versus Revenge, and so on. The rest of the class is pretty much just whack-a-mole with Shield Slam procs and hitting your library of offensive and defensive cooldowns. And on that note, you have a lot of offensive cooldowns in your kit. Avatar, Ravager, Demo Shout, Champion Spear, and Shield Charge. And they're all fairly simple. You pretty much want to use them all as often as you are able, and you want to layer all the damage bonus cooldowns on first. So Avatar, Demo Shout, that kind of thing, and then hit the damage dealing skills afterward. So you would throw down Ravager early because it lasts a really long time, 12 seconds a cast, but it basically goes like this. Ravager and Avatar in the same global because Avatar's off the global. Demo Shout is still on the global, the bane of my existence, and then Spear because it buffs your crits, and then Shield Charge, and then that's your big boom. Five spells in a row, 4 GCDs in a row, boom, 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 boom. The only time I hold offensive cooldowns on a warrior is if I'm nearing the end of a pull and I want to have them up for the start of the next pull, or maybe there's some sort of increased damage taken phase that I really need to hold them for. As for defensive cooldowns, you want to be pretty liberal with Shield Wall. Its cooldown is very short. It's actually been reduced, which is great. The same goes for Spell Reflection unless you're holding it to reflect a specific spell. Spell Block is really strong and you should use it pretty much anytime you're trying to, mitigate a bunch of spell damage. Stuff that you can't reflect specifically. Last Stand is good as a reactive defensive cooldown when you suddenly take a bunch of unexpected damage, and then Rallying Cry is useful as A group cooldown that you can use to help people live through specific mechanics, or you can just use it as a personal defensive cooldown if you want. If you don't need to save party members, you don't need to use it for a specific reason for the group, you can just use it for personal defensive value as well. Now I'm going to cover how to pull on a protection warrior. I like to start out by charging in and hitting Avatar and Thunderclap. I always try to hit Avatar when I'm mid-charge before that Thunderclap so that I can buff it with the Avatar bonus. Charge and Avatar will give you enough rage to cast Shield Block, so I cast that before I'm in melee range as well, ideally. I then use Ravager, then Demo Shout to get that damage buff active, then Spear and Shield Charge, and then I follow that up with more hot Thunderclap action, and then continue into the standard rotation. If you don't have Avatar available, you can still charge in, Thunderclap, Revenge, Shield Block, all the usual stuff, Establish Threat, and then you also have Challenging Shout if you really need it. That is a good approach, you know, if you need to establish AoE threat and you don't have cooldowns and you're struggling, just hit them with a Challenging Shout. They will definitely be hitting you for at least the next 3 seconds. As for stats, strength is the most important, so whenever possible, try to upgrade your item level before worrying about secondary stats. In terms of secondary stats, you want to enchant and gem for haste and crit as your number 1 and number 2 secondary stats. Versatility is also very close as a third. You probably want to sim yourself if you're really concerned about maximizing your damage output. You know, crit and verse can kind of flip-flop depending on basically how much of each you have. Okay, outro time. I still really like Warrior as I always have. It was my first class almost 20 years ago. It still has a very special place for me in my heart. I wrote this outro before the nerfs, and my initial thoughts were, is it great? No, but it's pretty good, and I think that's still exactly true. I think it got proportionally better, even though it was nerfed, but I think it got nerfed less than other people. It's definitely not bad, and more importantly, it is very fun. It's an engaging class that is pretty good, and that's a perfect combination. Fun and pretty good? Come on, what more could you ask for? I'm clearly very excited about it, and you should be too. Alright, that's it. Thanks for watching. Bye.